Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. We are kicking off the year with another series of episodes. This time, we are going to be talking about storytelling. In this episode, we're specifically going to talk about the stories we tell ourselves. So let's jump in. Hey, Peter.
Hi, Dani. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Yes, great to see you.
Good to see you. What are we talking about?
Today, we are going to talk about the stories we tell ourselves.
Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh.
This is an interesting topic because the stories we tell ourselves show up in all aspects of our lives, right?
Yeah.
From career, family, health, fitness, everything.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly find it interesting that the stories we tell ourselves in the design process or problem-solving process, and particularly how the stories we tell ourselves hold us back. Yeah, this will be a good topic to dive into.
It will be, yeah. And I think I had the same, maybe it's the our old human brain being wired for preservation, survival, and defense that, the immediate, both of us thought of the stories we tell ourselves that hold us back. It feels like that's the part of the brain that's at work when we're thinking of those. Yeah. So the stories we tell ourselves, usually we go into definitions here, but I don't think there's going to be a definition in the Internet Dictionary of stories we tell ourselves, but maybe we'll have to share our own on the fly.
I wonder if it's worthwhile defining what story means.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I like that. Let's give ourselves a bit of a solid starting point. Have a go.
So, consulting Google, I feel like we need something like a boop, 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 boop sound.
Okay. Well, you just did it. Perfect. Do it again.
Boop, 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 boop. That's my robot voice.
Okay.
So there's a couple of definitions. Just trying to see. The first one that came up when I Googled story is an account of imaginary or real people and events told for entertainment.
Oh, entertainment. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on to say it could also be a piece of gossip or rumor.
Mm-hmm.
A story could also be a false statement or a lie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
An account of past events in someone's life or in the development of something. A particular person's representation of the facts of a matter. Any of these hitting the spot for you?
Oh, definitely. I'm very glad you decided to look at the definition of story there, because some of those words popping out for me, like imaginary or real, facts or false statements. Entertainment was interesting. Lots to kind of go on there. Yeah, the stories we tell ourselves, and who is it, or which part of us is it entertaining? You've also made me think. Let's look up self or ourselves while we're at it, because I think in the context of our work and especially our design work, we can. I think I'd like to talk about the story we tell ourselves as individuals, and that's you, me, and everybody, because everyone's telling themselves stories all the time, but also expanding the definition of ourselves to the people we're working with. And we can do that if we've got time. Ourselves. Yeah. So the definition of ourselves is, it says it's used as the object of a verb or. Well, this is interesting. used not quite as snappy as our usual definitions. Danny's just warning you. Used as the object of a verb or preposition when this is the same as the subject of the clause, and the subject is the speaker and one or more other people considered together.
This is like taking me back to like elementary school grammar.
Yeah, me too. Or alternative, this is a bit more helpful. We or us personally, used to emphasize the speaker and one or more other people considered together. There we go. That's what we're looking for. We or us personally.
I want to share this one because so it goes used instead of myself by a sovereign or other person in authority.
Oh, okay.
Taking us off topic, but I just
It's like the royal we, is it?
yeah.
Ourselves. The
Um,
stories one tells oneself.
I like that second definition. Do you want to repeat that again?
Yes, we or us personally, and in brackets it says used to emphasize the speaker,
Yeah.
and one or more other people considered together. That's from the Oxford Dictionary of English.
Oh, let's go with that.
Yeah.
For story, I really like the definition around a particular person's representation. I think it's a representation of a situation. The definition says it's the representation of facts, but I don't always know that a story is factual,
No.
particularly stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely agree with that, and I think that's where a lot of the problems start to arise. So definition, yeah.
Yep. So we have a definition. Now what? Well, why don't we talk about a few examples of stories we tell ourselves, particularly
Yeah, okay.
in the problem solving process?
Yeah, in the process, and yeah, I like it. Okay. So stories we tell ourselves. I think some of the stories I can get into are not quite giving up, but anticipating challenges or blockers or obstacles even getting started. So when I'm unless somebody's coming to me asking for help, and so if the situation is I see an opportunity and there is I see an opportunity to help, I can get into the story of finding the right person or to kind of understand that I can provide help. The story I can tell myself is that's going to be challenging, and then having the conversation that ends up with that person accepting the help or wanting the help and wanting help in the particular way that we can provide is going to be a challenge. I guess maybe the summary or type of story is anticipating or creating imaginary obstacles before they've actually been established as factual. Maybe I've just summarized up every single unhelpful story we tell ourselves.
Well, I think within your story are a few things we can unpack, right? I know that sometimes in the design process, we might think people are going to be resistant to this approach. We might think that the one that I come across often is that we can't use, like, design won't help solve our problem. And I see you nodding your head, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, definitely. And you made me think of another kind of classic. Yeah. I mean, we could do like the top 10 greatest hits, couldn't we? Make an album out of it. But another one, it's going to take too long.
Yes, it's going to take too long. I find that story really fascinating because something I've been kind of unpacking lately is like there seems to be this focus on delivery, delivery, delivery without really thinking about the impact of the delivery.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like it's going to design thinking is going to take too long. So let's just do it the way we've done it. But then knowing the way you've been doing it hasn't been working. But let's go do it again anyway.
Yeah. Which is, I'm imagining the story that's playing out in someone else's mind or another group of people, or I guess in our framing, telling themselves that story. Yeah, so design won't help us, or it's going to take too long. Yeah, this let's categorize it as kind of resistance. So the story we're telling ourselves is like anticipating resistance where there might not be any. What other stories? What do you find? Are there any stories you find yourself? I mean, I kind of jumped right into like before you even get started. This is the sort of story that can start to play out in my mind, and but then there's probably others during our design process. The roller coaster that it might be.
I think there is this, like, I'm not a designer, so I can't use design thinking. That's a story I hear often.
Okay.
There's also the all or nothing story. Like, I think there's a misconception that design thinking is a step-by-step process and you've got to start at step 1 and go all the way to step 6. But there are ways to bring in elements of design thinking to any situation.
Yeah, nice. Actually, and when you said all or nothing thinking, yes, the story of needing to do the whole, in inverted commas, design thinking process is definitely true. But then all or nothing thinking, again, through in any part of life, but in particular in a design process, that can be a kind of stumbling block story as well, where you think that it needs to be definitely 100% this or 100% that. that's another unhelpful story. As I'm describing these, actually, I'm thinking, the design, helpfully designed thinking has, our kind of toolbox and capabilities and mindsets have kind of built-in antidotes to these and alternative stories, I suppose we could call them. So, but we'll come on to that, I hope.
So I think that's probably some good examples to
Yeah.
kind of ground what we mean by the stories we tell ourselves in the design process. So naturally, humans do have sort of a script that I think sometimes we have some of the best conversations in our own heads. Some of the best, some of the most volatile conversations happen in our heads.
Okay. Yeah.
It's something that our brains just naturally do. We love to catastrophize. We love to, we are very creative, imaginary creatures. And I think this whole storytelling for ourselves is part of that. If we wanted to kind of go down our framework of, why, the question that I would want to answer here is, why is it important to understand? So we can't stop the stories we tell ourselves, but I think it's a matter of like, how do we become aware of them? And then what do we do? It's like, why is it important to understand the stories we tell ourselves?
Yeah, nice. The awareness, and then the final step of what do we do about them. So why is it important? Well, for me, I think it's important to pay attention to the stories that are playing out in my head to, I guess, learn which ones are, I guess it starting to kind of identify what kind of stories they are, maybe giving them some sort of label or category, and doing that as early as possible before you get too attached and into the story. That ultimately the purpose would be to examine the story and identify whether one is helpful or not, and to, I guess, how much is imaginary and how much is real in the story. Because I think, I mean, certainly from my experience, I don't know about anybody's, but I imagine other people, you can find yourself spiraling into a story and staying in that story over a long period and getting wrapped up in it, not doing anything about it, and then eventually might realize that you're getting kind of stuck in this story that's just not helpful, and as it turns out is not true once you start to investigate and question parts of the story. So I guess why is it important to understand is because right at the beginning we said stories that hold us back, like nobody wants to be held back. Do we want to be moving forwards, growing? Or I do. I don't want to be held back, although I do want to learn. I'm slightly distracted, everyone, because Dani did a me and reached behind her and pulled a book off her bookshelf. Maybe for the first time ever. What you got there, Dani? What's the book that's come to mind? Learned Optimism. Okay, that's the old, what's his name again?
Martin Seligman.
Seligman, yeah.
The reason why this book came to mind when you were talking about this is, you're right, that we tell these stories to ourselves. They're most of the time they're assumption based, right? Or they're based on an experience that we had at some point, and we take that one experience in a specific context, in a specific situation, and we generalize it. So it could be true that there was one project where using the design thinking process took a really long time, or it could, there might have been one project where everybody was really just did not want to use design thinking. And then we take that one experience, that one incident, and we generalize it and go, oh, design thinking takes forever. Without looking at that situation and going, what are the things that made that happen? Or what are the things in that situation that made people resistant? So there is this model that from the Learn Optimism book that it's called the ABCDE model. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Basically, you kind of talk about, so A is for adversity. So you kind of talk about the thing that you're facing against. B is for belief. So you talk about what is the belief that around that. And then what's the consequence of that belief? D is for dispute. So this is kind of giving an argument. So this is like putting yourself in the position of arguing the opposite.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And one of the ways that you could do that is actually looking for evidence that supports the opposite argument, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I pulled that book out, because I
Yeah.
think we often get into these modes of
Yeah.
operating under assumptions or
Mhm.
not, and the story we tell ourselves is purely assumption based. And
Mhm.
sometimes to break that cycle,
Mhm.
I just find that a really useful tool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. Sounds familiar. We might have chatted about it briefly in another episode, but I don't remember which. So thanks for bringing it right back into the front of my mind. And I wonder, shall we have a go at making that concrete? Let's work. Should we do that? Well, let's
Yeah.
work through this
Yeah.
this unhelpful story about, let's say, either I'm not a designer, so I can't use design thinking, or the one around maybe this is going to take us too long.
Let's do the first one. I think
Yeah.
that's,
Okay.
yeah. So,
All right.
so the A here, adversity, would be I'm not a designer, so I can't use design thinking.
Mhm.
So what's the belief? That's the story we tell ourselves. So what's
Yeah.
the belief?
Oh, well, I imagine that there's lots of different beliefs here that could be everything from I didn't go to design school, I don't have a formal design qualification, to my job is something completely opposite to design, so I no longer have any imagination when it comes to the work that I do. What else? I'm kind of speaking on behalf of other people there. What about me?
Why don't we go with this is not a skill I have?
Okay.
That's the belief,
All right.
right? You
Yeah.
believe it's not something that you have the capability to do.
Okay.
So that was B. So
Mhm.
C, what is the consequence of this belief?
The consequence of believing that it's not a skill that I have is that I won't attempt to try.
Yep.
I won't even start.
Yep. So you won't try, you won't start, you won't even just try to engage in,
Yeah.
any of it, because so what are some things that you can use to dispute that argument? So you're now trying to play devil's advocate, right?
Yeah.
So what are some things that can dispute belief?
Well, I guess a helpful one is everyone's got to start somewhere. One of my favorite credos, the Wright brothers and sister didn't have a pilot's license. Everyone starts knowing nothing and not being able to do anything. So that's one angle of dispute. Another one might be there must be some skills and experience I have that can be transferable into this particular domain. Another one might be I'm a fast learner. There you go. There's a few.
There's quite a bit there. You said the last one that you said is I'm a fast learner.
Yep.
So what's some evidence that you have that you're a fast learner, like a concrete example?
Oh, well, maybe I've used Duolingo in the past to learn a language, and quicker than the average through a particular Duolingo module to learn a language.
So now that you've gone from an adversity, a belief, a consequence, a dispute, and some evidence,
Mm-hmm.
is there a new story you could start telling yourself?
Oh, nice. I see what you've done. You've turned this into a bit of a cycle. Okay, so maybe the new story might be, the new story might be, I'm not a designer. I haven't, it's not a skill that I have. I know that I can pick things up and learn things quickly, and it's something I enjoy. So I'm going to start learning how to use design thinking, and I can pick it up quicker than other people. Does that sound something like that?
There's a couple of tweaks I would make to that story, though.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a designer yet.
Oh, yes, yet. Oh, that magic three-letter word. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you start adding the word yet to any negative thing you say to yourself, it just changes. It just changes the mood of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I was a PhD student, which is a time in your life where you tell yourself a lot of stories, I used to come back to, I was not particularly the best math student. I barely passed algebra 2, and I was learning how to do some pretty sophisticated statistical analysis. And the story I kept telling myself is, how can you do this? You couldn't even pass algebra.
Yeah.
And to the point, like one of my professors had to really say to me, like, you just need to let that go.
Yeah. Okay.
I had to start telling myself a different story, because it was really impacting my ability to actually learn the material that I was really keen to learn. I wanted to learn. And also from the feedback that I got from professors and advisors, I had a knack for it. Like I just understood certain things about statistics. But the assumption I was making is because I was bad at this type of math, I was going to be bad at this type of math. So for me, that word yet was very transformational, right? I don't understand all of the things I need to know about statistics yet.
And it's from what you're saying, kind of it opens up. It's all automatically kind of triggers in your mind, starts your mind kind of thinking about exploring what are the ways that you could actually become or achieve that or acquire that skill, whatever it is. What about, so I do like this model. I'm wondering, and as we're sharing the stories, I wonder if you've got any experience of having a group kind of use that model. Because I've been in situations before where as a team, as a design team, or as even during a piece of design thinking work, maybe a sprint, we can find ourselves in a little bit of a lull or facing obstacles, or I was going to say pit of despair, which is quite the extreme version, but in the trough, partway through a piece of work. And often that can be down to something imaginary rather than something real.
The answer to your question is yes, and I'll give you I'll talk about using this in a group. The other thing I want to mention, though, is that the reason that we use the word belief is belief is a very powerful thing. And we need to be really careful of not labeling beliefs as real or not real, because if you believe it, it is real for you. Just a little caution on that.
So it's the thing we are choosing to believe.
You might believe that you cannot design something, and whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter, because to you, because you believe that, and until you believe something differently, that is real. Right? You can absolutely use this model in a team. I often use it when teams feel like they're in a stuck position. Because I think and it kind of veers away from, I think, what Martin Seligman designed it for initially, or maybe it's just, different applications of it. But I find it really useful to get people unstuck. If we kind of define what the adversity is, or the stuck point, or whatever you want to label it, and then you kind of start going through it. And what's really interesting is, particularly when you go through, okay, what are the beliefs that we have around this problem? It's really interesting how you can start to see patterns of how, the things that individuals believe, how they can click together and create like a really powerful coalition of, that keeps us in the stuck space. If you're going to run this in a group, though, I recommend the writing of the adversity you could do as a group. All of the other ones, I recommend kind of running an exercise where people write down their own thoughts and then everybody shares. So it's a really good post-it note exercise. So I find it quite a powerful tool to get teams moving.
Cool.
The other thing I was going to say is, the same way that collective beliefs can hold us back, collective beliefs can also move us to doing things that we think are impossible.
Okay. So the complete opposite. Maybe this is a bit of a side tangent, but what about collective beliefs propelling us to do things that are not the right thing to do? Where that's probably a whole other episode. We did talk about ethics in another one, but I guess there's a bit of a cautionary note around that. But so what you're saying, though, is we can, in the same way that collective beliefs can hold us back, they can actually do the complete opposite and propel us forwards and amaze ourselves about what we can actually do. What I was going to say was just talking this through both individually and from a group perspective. I can imagine this working and being really powerful. And actually, a couple of the components of this is something that I use in a design process anyway. So, for example, at the beginning of a particular piece of work that I'm bringing people together to look into a problem or opportunity, then one of the things I'll help them do as individuals within, as a group, is let's bring everybody's beliefs and perspectives and maybe hypotheses on this particular design challenge. Let's bring them out and into the surface and share them. So that's on the kind of external problem we're trying to solve. But you've helped me imagine and see that you could do exactly the same thing, but for the way that the work is going, or a particular sticking point in how we're approaching the work, whether that's within the team or externally within the organization. And I can see this being really powerful. I mean, I know you talked me through an example, and I think maybe the key point is the finishing part of that kind of cycle is translating or transforming this previous story about adversity into something that is more positive, has the kind of possibility in it rather than the impossibility or the obstacle. Is that right? Is there a useful, I don't know, frame or template for that kind of end statement, or the new story, I guess I would describe it as?
It's really reframing the stories we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And this framework that we've gone through helps us to reframe our thinking. The trick is, though, every time that other old story, like, we just have to repeat this new story enough that it becomes norm, and learning to let that old story go. And I'll share this. This is an exercise I learned a while ago, which was to name that voice in your head that always tells you these stories.
Okay.
So I've named my voice Gertrude. Apologies for anyone that's named Gertrude. It was just the name that came to mind. So when I find myself telling myself these things, I kind of just signal to myself, like, shut up, Gertrude. What do you know about this, Gertrude?
Yeah.
And it's just a silly thing you can do, but it just helps disconnect. It just helps interrupt that thought pattern.
Yeah. Nice. And introduces a bit of humor and maybe sort of diminishes in a helpful way the voice that you've called Gertrude. And thank you for sharing that, Dani. I also have a voice. I've never given it a name. And this comes back to that one of the first definitions that included entertainment. So, and Gertrude is getting entertainment from the stories that Gertrude is telling, I imagine, and they're not entertaining or helpful to you. It makes me think of the book by Dr. Steve Peters, and I'm going to remind myself of the title as we're talking. The book talks about, or uses a model to help us understand our minds, and divides the mind into three kind of components. There's the mind we think of as us, then there's the computer, and then in this context, the important part is the monkey. So the monkey mind. The chimp paradox is so he talks about the chimp mind, and one of the key takeaways from that book was that if you're waking up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, often with stories playing through your head, then be aware that that's the chimp, or maybe Gertrude, having a good old yarn around the campfire, and you've just happened to woken up and tuned into it. The message that Steve Peters gives is, don't pay attention to the stories that the chimp or Gertrude is telling you at 3 or 4 in the morning. Okay, so we've covered what the definition of stories and ourselves is. We've touched on why it's important to understand. You've given us a really helpful framework from learned optimism around once we kind of become aware of and realize that a story isn't helpful, then a way to have a conversation with ourselves around transforming that story and reframing it. And we've talked about applying that in a group setting. Maybe as we've been talking about this, and it's something I mentioned earlier, but the stories we're telling ourselves can be in relation to or about other people, and especially at work, and especially when we're encountering adversity and challenges at work. Often it's about how other people are responding to us, and especially as designers, design thinkers, because it's not 100% familiar to most people, then sometimes we can come across kind of resistance, passive or active. But maybe I guess in this conversation it made me think of a couple of things. One is always be aware that other people have got similar stories playing through their minds. So part of our job, I guess, is to take a step back and try and understand their stories. And for me, there's 2 things that I've learned to do to get out of negative stories, and they are really both about focusing well, two of them. One of them is about focusing on other people, and it's simply, and the other one is about trying to get out of my head. So the first one of getting out of my head is doing something physical. So if you find yourself like going around in a story spiral, and not getting out of it, then do something that gets you connecting your mind and body, and that could be as simple as standing up and walking around, or going for a walk, or stretching, or yoga, or something that really reminds you that you have a body as well as a mind, and the world is not just between your ears. It's so much more than that. But then more importantly, in terms of design and connecting with other people, and in particular connecting with other people in the work that you're doing, getting out of your own head and starting to understand somebody else's can be a real breakthrough step, because some of that imaginary storytelling you've got often turns out to be completely well, a great story if it was written in a book, and if it was a piece of fiction, it might be a bestseller. But in reality, it's never quite as exciting or dramatic as you're imagining. So maybe what I'm saying in a very long-winded way is just get off your bum and go and speak to the person. Try and understand them. Find out what they believe is an adversity. Try and understand their beliefs.
So just as a little bit of a thought experiment. So say the scenario is that you have a imaginary workmate named Bob.
Oh yeah, Bob. Mm-hmm.
And you've built the story up in your head that Bob doesn't really appreciate design thinking, and he's not going to want to use this approach. And as a thought experiment, what would it look like if you went to Bob and say, hey, I get the impression that you may be resistant to using design thinking to solve this problem. What might that look like if you actually did that?
Well, that would be, I think, first of all, if you simply ask that question in a normal working context, nobody's going to die. That's a good starting point. And working back from there, what Bob would probably give you like an honest answer, I imagine, if you framed the question in a way like that, that's kind of inviting them to share their perspective with you in a non-challenging, threatening way. And maybe even better than that, they would give you an insight into what they're worried about, and maybe what they need. And from there, you can start going, well, if this is what success looks like to you, then actually, yeah, you're right. We can't help you, but design thinking is going to help you succeed. But maybe there is some way that we could, yeah. So it's going to open up the conversation, and also in the context of this episode around unhelpful stories, is going to help you, I guess, get certainty around the story. And it's a funny thing, once you start getting certainty, then the story that starts to disappear. Our minds no longer start telling us the story. So we can either understand that Bob, is interested and we can work with him, or realize that Bob is not interested and we can't help him, and we'll move on to the next person.
I want to point out that there's two types of stories that we're talking about here, right?
Okay.
There are stories we tell ourselves about other people that are based on assumptions. And then there are stories we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah.
So the example that we walk through is, no, I can't use design thinking because I'm not a designer. I can't learn statistics because I barely passed algebra 2. These are stories that we tell ourselves. They're both equally limiting, but I just want to point out that not only do we have these stories we tell ourselves, but we also have these different types of stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, nice distinction there. Bringing it back to the Seligman ABCDE, I guess that's applicable to both kinds of stories.
Yep.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. It is a really versatile model, and once you kind of understand it and you've used it a few times, you'll find yourself using it more and more.
Cool. Well, you can guess what my takeaway is going to be.
You also mentioned you felt like we talked about this before. So we have talked about this before in our situation optimizing episode.
Oh, well done, Dani. Good memory.
Because this is the ABCD exercise is one that I use to help people develop their situation optimizing muscle.
Nice. Okay. So this is definitely my takeaway. It's situation optimizing. We could say that's both equally applicable to our internal worlds as our external worlds. Nice. Well, this has been one of these episodes, Danny, where I feel like I'm getting coaching or therapy. So thank you for that. And I'm certainly feeling a lot more optimistic and back in touch with a couple of tools and even just simple words like yet. How powerful is that? For these things that I can use to help myself and also help any groups that I'm working with. Have we got anything else we want to?
So we also usually talk about how, like, the design thinking capabilities that show up in this topic, right?
Yeah.
The obvious one that we've been talking about is situation optimizing.
Yep. I also think there's something in, that last kind of idea I had around, talking to the person or the people, whoever they are, that are part of your story. That's definitely part of empathetic exploring. Like empathizing with your colleagues is so powerful. And maybe, there's potentially something around, well, I mean, if we're working through an unhelpful story as a group, then that's definitely aligns and part of collective collaboration. But then it's like that getting back out of the unhelpful story cycle and actually, creating more and more evidence for the more helpful story. That's, curious experimentation definitely feels like that plays a part there. Yeah, as ever, there's, more than one capability at play at any one time.
Absolutely. We could simply answer this always by going, well, they're all applicable.
Yeah.
But it's kind of picking out what are the things that are most applicable.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Empathetic exploration. The only thing I'll add to that is that sometimes empathetic exploration is internal as well. Because you can't empathize with others, or your ability to empathize with others is limited by how well you can empathize with yourself. So sometimes when we're in those situations where you believe you cannot do something, a little bit of empathetic exploration within yourself can be quite powerful. In those situations where we have beliefs about other people, absolutely go talk to them. And go talk to them in a way that's not judgmental, right? So truly in the spirit of empathetic exploration.
Yeah.
And curious experimentation, I think this ties back to the whole idea of curious experimentation is rather than sitting there and thinking about it, go do something. Essentially, I mean, there's more to it, but so one of the most effective ways we could get out of the stories we tell ourselves is to stop telling ourselves things and just go try something.
Yeah, go. Yeah.
And to bring that home, I shared with you my struggles of the stories I was telling myself. The thing that I started doing is I said, okay, well, I'm just going to go run some analysis and see how I do. I know that I tend to learn when I'm doing anyway. So I just had some practice data and I said, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this analysis. And
that's how you got your statistics.
That's how I got Gertrude to shut up.
Nice. Yeah. Well, the way I quiet my chimp is again by getting up and doing something. I can, and often that's just going and speaking to somebody. Starting to understand them and starting to work ideas up and together and exploring the possibilities within both of our kind of perspectives. Doing something. I think just do something. I think that's it brings me back to one of my favorite ever quotes. Don't get ready, get started. So helpful when we're stuck. Just choose something. Doesn't matter what. All
right. I think that brings us to the end of this episode.
Okay.
What's your takeaway today, Pete?
Well, I'm going to have two, actually. One is just remembering the word yet and putting that at the end of sentences can be so powerful. But the main takeaway is a reminder of Martin Seligman's ABCDE model. I'm going to start looking for opportunities to apply that as much as I can and learn to use it and turn it into some sort of go-to or habit. How about you?
Mine is actually Steven Peter's work. I haven't looked at, I haven't read his work in a long time. So going back and looking at some of that. So thanks for sparking that thought and adding to my reading list.
No, are always on reading lists. Nice. Oh well, we've given each other a bit of inspiration this week, Dani. Great stuff.
Nice. Well, till next time, thanks for listening.
Thanks for a chat, Dani. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next
Bye,
time.
Peter.
Bye.
Bye.